I am unfortunately going to ask you a bunch of stuff I know you've answered before, but I think
For
your
sure.
story is really cool, and
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you tell it. So you go from never having a credited screenplay to having Ben Affleck directing your movie and getting sole
Mhm.
screenwriting credit. Um, Start me at the beginning, man. How do you get here?
I mean, gosh, that's it's a long road, right? And it always is. I mean, that's the funny part of this. Like, yes, it is my first produced credit and like my first screenplay and all of that, but it certainly is not the first one I've written. You go through just years and years and years of rejections and starts and stops and one step forward, two step back type of thing. The short version is I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and came out to LA for film school. I went to USC and was in the screenwriting program there. Um, but then you kind of graduate and you're back on your own, like right at the bottom of the pile, and I just did, I mean, gosh, years and years of just kind of grunge work, or drudge work, whatever you want to call it, working as an assistant, for a management company and for a producer and as a reader. And, you're writing on the side, but it just is kind of that question of like, what gets noticed, and like, how do you get a manager and how do you get an agent and how do you get your work noticed? And it's a really frustrating thing, right? Especially like, just coming out here from Chicago, it's not like I had, even that like one person who I knew in the film industry who could help kind of guide the way. So you kind of just, a lot of times you just have to figure it out for yourself, and you're kind of feeling around in the dark, and you just kind of, you follow the path that feels right in your gut. So for me, it was writing specs, and I finally kind of broke through in 2018. I wrote this spec that got me an agent and a manager. It was this college football movie. But then, and I thought at that time, like, gosh, I've made it, like, even though that script didn't sell or anything like that, I was, it just felt like, okay, I at least have representation now. And that was like the big step I was missing. But, little did I know the path would only get longer. Because, after you get representation, they send you on all these kind of, they're called general meetings, right? So you go and like meet all the different production companies in Hollywood and producers and studios, and they pitch you all the projects they have. And while that's really exciting, it's really hard to book those jobs, like
Yeah.
there's so many writers that go up for it. And you kind of have to like figure out the movie before you even write it, which is how the process, I guess, should work. But like that's work that's you're doing unpaid for someone else. And
Yeah.
there's dozens of other writers that are working on the same stuff. So I looking back, I feel like I wasted a lot of time, and like
Mm.
hindsight's always 2020, but I was just so like desperate to try and make some sort of headway that I got caught up in trying to chase all these assignments instead of just writing something for myself, and in a way, the pandemic kind of served as like a reset. It gave me time and space in those early days of lockdown. They're just kind of like, look in the mirror and be like honest with myself and be like, I'm not doing the work that I want to do, and that's always a hard and tough realization to come to. And a lot of times you don't even want to admit it to yourself, but I wrote this spec similar to Air. It was a spec biopic, but it was about the early days of Marvel Comics and Stan Lee,
Mm.
Jack Kirby, and kind of that whole story. And they always tell you like don't spec something you don't control the rights to, which like on paper is good advice, and in theory that is good advice. Um,
Particularly with a company like Disney who owns the rights, who's very image conscious for
Well,
that
and
particular.
exactly, and therein lies like a little bit of a lesson I learned, and even though I wasn't really thinking about it, subconsciously affected how I was writing Air ultimately, because that Stan Lee project, like people responded to the script, and I got a lot of cool meetings off it, and there was some excitement about the script. Sony actually has Stan Lee's life rights,
Mm.
and like a complicated deal, the same one they got Spider-Man in. Um, And for a second, it looked like that movie was going to happen, you know, and it was like, oh my gosh, like here we go, you know. And then of course that project died, you know, for a lot of different reasons, but primarily exactly what you're saying, you know, like you're talking about a fairly high profile and public figure in Stan Lee and obviously in Marvel Comics. So it's like there I was right back to square one, you know, which was just like so frustrating. And I literally was like, I'm okay, like everyone was right. I should not have spec something I didn't control the rights to. Um, but then literally, you know, there I was in May of 2020 watching The Last Dance, and I saw that, you know, kind of short clip on the Jordan deal and the Nike of it all, and you know how unlikely the whole thing was. And I was just like, gosh, that is such an interesting story. And honestly, my first instinct was like, someone must have tried this already, you know, in some sort of capacity. But when I, you know, kind of figured out that, man, it was kind of untouched, I just thought, well, like, I guess I'm going to break that promise to myself, you know, and get back to specking something that I literally have zero control over. And, you know, literally in my head, it was a writing sample, you know, because it was like the early days of lockdown. You know, obviously Hollywood, like the rest of the world, was pretty shut down. So I was like, you know, I'll take the time, I'll write a writing sample. Hopefully it'll be good and it can get me a different job, you know, like it will book me a job writing a different biopic or a different sports story or you know, whatever. And in a way that kind of freed me to not worry so much about like whether it was going to get made or not, because I was just so certain that it wouldn't. And it did allow me to kind of just make the script more interesting on the page. You know, I broke like a lot of those like quote unquote screenwriting rules, right? Of like, don't write what you can't shoot on what the camera can't see, right? And like don't talk to the reader, and don't use we and I and pronouns like that. And you know, I was just so dead set on like this is going to be like the most readable script it can possibly be, because that's how it was always going to live in my head. And you know, I think that is in a lot of ways what people responded to. It's this kind of like odd thing of like surrendering the idea that it would ever get made is actually what kind of allowed me to write with, you know, with intention.
Yeah.
I is kind of the word I would use. And, you know, just like the Stan Lee script, like, you know, my reps were, you know, I would say fairly like perturbed that I had, that I had like wasted time writing this, even though they liked the script. But to their credit, you know, they were like, okay, well, let's take some shots on the script and try to get it to places that would actually have some interest in making it, right? So obviously you're going to look at like sports driven production companies. And some of the first ones we went to were Mandalay and Skydance, who was starting this scripted sports division at that time. And those two companies ended up being the original production companies on the movie. And, you know, from there, it was a question of like, okay, what rights do we need, and like whose permission do we need to write this movie, to make this movie. And the first step was Sonny, right? Because he's the protagonist of the movie, and you know, if he's not on board with the movie from the onset, then like, you know, you're in trouble before you even start. So Skydance and Mandalay got in touch with Sonny and his people, and you know, I had this just amazing experience driving down to Palm Springs where Sonny lives with his wife Pam, and just like sitting at the table with them and going through the script and talking about everything, you know, like what we got right, what we got wrong, what was super important to him, what was less important. And you know, I did a quick pass on the script based on that day sitting with him. And then over the holiday break in 2021, you know, we took our shots at directors and actors, right? The idea being like, to actually finance this movie, you need, it is kind of, you know, a movie about people in rooms talking. So like you need you need movie stars to put on the poster, and obviously you need an exciting filmmaker. So we kind of took our like dream shots and submissions over that holiday break. And, you know, Ben was obviously on the list. And you know, I got back in January of 2022 and got that call that, you know, he had responded to the script and was interested in meeting, and that he wanted to direct it too, which was super exciting. And then, yeah, there I was, you know, sitting with Ben Affleck, which definitely was, you know, a bit surreal, but at the same time, it's like, I'd been down those roads a couple times on some of my other scripts and had met, like big A-list actors who were interested in projects. I think thing the inside baseball part of Hollywood is like, just because an A-list actor is interested in being in the movie or making the movie doesn't mean the movie's going to happen, right? Like there's still
Right.
so many steps that need to fall into place for it to happen, starting with obviously a studio that's willing to finance the movie. But then,
Well, and even with Ben
yeah, go ahead.
specifically, I feel like I've seen like 5 different projects after Live by Night that I thought were going to be Ben's next film, and
Yeah.
you know,
Like stuff happens, like that's just Hollywood, like best intentions can always go to the wayside. And especially when you're, of the stature of like Ben and Matt, you're getting stuff submitted to you every single day, and there's new and exciting stuff on the horizon at all times. So again, it's just like I had been through that experience a couple times of having like, really exciting names involved in scripts I had written, but then, they kind of go away or fall apart for, like for the reasons all these things happen. There's just like another project comes along and, no fault of their own. It's just, that's the nature of the Hollywood machine. Luckily with this one, Ben and Matt were really motivated to make something together that summer, and like, again, that's why so much of life is being in the right place at the right time. And, I'm obviously super proud of the script, but I always tell people like, that's why you have to put material out there, because you just never know who's going to be looking for what at
Mhm.
a certain time, like if I'd written Air in 2019, who's to say what happens with it? It's Ben and Matt were super motivated to go make something that summer. They had kind of this 6-week window that they could both do, and they were like, let's go figure this out right away, and there was urgency, which is so rare in Hollywood. Normally
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we're gonna go, and then you don't hear anything for 2 months, and then it's like, yeah, it's still happening, and then the phone dies for another 2 months, and it's like, actually nothing's gonna happen. So this was kind of the exact opposite, where like from that first meeting, it was like, no, go, 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 go. And let's figure this out. Um, so there was a lot of steps involved, right? Like the big thing is Ben was we already had Sonny's life rights at the time. So we had that taken care of, and had Sonny on board on the project, which was super important. But Ben, rightfully so, was like, it's really paramount to me that we get Michael Jordan's blessing on the movie. And that's all. The minute he said that, I was like, oh my God, this really is never going to happen, because
Yeah.
like, what motivation does Michael Jordan have? But, look, to Ben's credit, like he went about it completely the right way. There was just so much authenticity involved in those like next couple passes at the script. And, when he flew down to meet Michael, he really was able to sit at that table with him and like, kind of give him the intentions of the movie. And luckily Michael was open to it and provided his own kind of set of, not even notes per se, but just like the things that were really important to him, including Howard White being in the movie, which is where Chris Tucker's character comes from, and that George Raveling was in the movie, which is Marlon Wayans' character. And then of course he was like, and Viola Davis has to play my mom. And then I'm like, okay, this movie is truly never going to happen. It's like those first two we can take care of, like, we can write them into the movie. I can't write Viola Davis into this movie. Um, but again, like it's just, there was so much kismet involved in this project. And I think like the cast that had already been assembled, and obviously like elevating Dolores's role, I think that was really exciting to Viola. And, getting to play this kind of, you know, ultimately a super important person in history that just, kind of has got lost in the shuffle of Michael being the greatest basketball player of all time. Like the role Dolores played in that deal was so paramount. And like to be able to give her the credit she's due and show it on the big screen, I think that was really attracted to Viola, and we were so lucky to get her. And to me, she just makes the movie and brings just like a whole other human element to a movie about a shoe deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so important that it almost surprises me to hear that she wasn't part of the screenplay from the beginning.
Yeah, well, I should say like Dolores was, she was, because I had done, a bunch of research, and obviously I knew that she was kind of acting as, you know, Michael's not business manager, but like she was in all those meetings and she was the one that pushed him to Nike. We knew all that, but that is just like what the research covers, right? And then when Ben went and sat with Michael, Michael just really emphasized, like, at the end of the day, how important she was to closing the deal and pushing for the percentage of sales and all of that. So like that part of the movie really came from, that meeting with Michael. But no, of course she was in the movie from the get-go.
Well, one thing I was curious about, you mentioned your research. I was a little surprised to see that this was just an original screenplay because there
Yeah.
is so much detail on it. I mean, I know you got the 5 minutes of the gist from The Last Dance, obviously, but this is a very thorough, well-researched movie. So what did you do in terms of finding all the facts and specifics when you were building this screenplay?
I mean, it was literally just scouring, I mean, truly anything you can think of, right? Like there were obvious places to start, like I ordered a bunch of books on Jordan. I mean, honestly, I owned a lot of those books already, just growing up as a Bulls fan.
Sure.
So a lot of books on Michael and then a lot of books on Nike, right? So there were a couple of Jordan texts that were really important. David Halberstam wrote this kind of just like the most thorough Jordan story you'll read, the Jordan Rules by Sam Smith. Not necessarily about this specific time, but just about like a young Michael Jordan and what he was like. And then from the Nike side of things, Strasser's wife, actually, the wife of the character that Jason Bateman plays, wrote this unauthorized history of Nike called Swoosh. Which is super good. It's like 700 pages that is just so thorough of the history of Nike. So reading that was super important. And then obviously Shoe Dog I read just to kind of get inside the Phil Knight's head, and that became paramount when it came to writing that character and kind of taking that character on his own journey, even though he was kind of the supporting character. And then I mean truly just scouring every corner of the internet you can imagine. Luckily it's 1984, so it's like not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it, it's like you could find podcasts and YouTube videos and newspaper articles just about all the characters involved. And then it just was really like, okay, how can we piece together like all of these different source materials into kind of a tapestry and the fabric of the story. So yeah, it's one of those weird just terminology things where it's like, yes, original screenplay. It's like, how is that possible when it's based on a true story? But, just like the letter of the law, it's like, if it's not from one source, then it's technically an original screenplay, which like, that's that's like a label thing.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's definitely fair. It's just it's incredibly thorough. Chris Messina's character writing that, was that kind of a composite, or was that was that based pretty extensively on the real agent?
Yeah, I mean, you do research into David Falk, and he is like, the prototypical power agent. I mean, you have to be Michael Jordan's agent. And by the way, to get him the deals that he did. So yes, I mean, did I have fun with that role? Of course. Like I kind of took that idea and ran with it in terms of like, let's like turn this up to 11 in terms of being like the quote unquote power agent.
Yeah.
And then look, like, you have to give all the credit in the world to Chris Messina, because
For sure.
he took what was on the page and just brought it to life in a way that, like, I never could have imagined. It was just hilarious, and he brings this whole other element to the movie. Those phone calls between him and Matt are some of my favorite scenes. So it's like, it's a mixture of all that stuff. It's like, I do believe that's who David Falk was. Like, I don't think, is it exaggerated? Yes, of course. But I don't think we are super far off base. And look, ultimately at the end of the day, like, he's protecting his client, as kind of funny as the role is, and as like loud and turned up as that role is. Like all good supporting characters, like I do view it as like he believes he's doing the right thing, and he is, so it's like you turn the camera, you could do a movie about him, and it's like that's typically how I try to look at supporting characters. You know, you want them to be the star of their own movie that doesn't exist because of the movie you're writing, but it is like, you know, kind of an offshoot.
The Air cinematic universe. I can hear
Yeah,
the dollar
exactly.
signs.
Yeah.
um, well, that's very cool. And then last question I was going to ask, were the needle drops scripted? Because I feel like the way you said you wrote this script, did you already have some of these songs literally like written on the page?
Yeah, I had a lot of needle drops in the script. I don't think many of them made it into the final movie. You know, that was that was mostly Ben, and like it was one of the first things Ben said was like, you know, I want to use a lot of needle drops, and like I would be cool if like almost all of them are from 1984. I was a little more liberal in my usage of them in the script, you know, and I had more I don't know, kind of early hip hop in there too, just because of like, you know, the cultural impact
Sure.
of the shoe and all of that. And yeah, I mean, I'll never forget seeing like the director's cut of the movie for the first time and hearing one, I was like, there's no way they're ever gonna get all these songs, you know, like there's just no way. And they did. I mean, it was you
That's
know, it
insane.
was yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, so you've established yourself as someone, and you mentioned your first spec script was a college basketball movie. So you've established yourself as kind of a sports biography writer. Is that kind of what you're looking to continue? Are you looking to flesh out lesser known stories of sports history, or is there something else you want to write about going forward?
I mean, I just look for character, you know, I really do. Like, I love writing these type of movies. Is it the only thing I ever want to do? No, of course not, you know, but you know, it comes from this place of like the advice you hear the most, I would say, in film school is write what you know.
Yeah, and
And
you knew the Bulls.
yeah, that's it, man. You know, it's like there's obviously a really literal interpretation of that advice, but growing up in the suburbs of Chicago as like I was basically a background extra in a John Hughes movie, like the kid who didn't have all that excitement and romance and partying and all of that, you know, it's like I didn't really have that sort of like, you know, story to tell about growing up or really like anything autobiographical. So then it becomes like, yeah, what do I know, right? And it's like I always tell people, it's like, you know, normally when you're looking for an idea, like I'm always a big advocate of looking inward, not outward, you know. It's like just what's the stuff that you're most passionate about when it's just you know, and like you're not worried about are other people going to like it or will other people be interested in it? It's like if you are super interested in it, then I can guarantee you that that others will be as well. So for me, that was like a real revelation when I was specking. And I think that ultimately that is, you know, like my first spec came from a place of just like, I love college football, but I've always felt like we haven't seen the true sport depicted on screen, you know, like that script Bagman is more of a crime movie in the
Yeah,
vein of like Heat or Catch Me If You Can, but set in the crazy backdrop of college football. So
sounds awesome.
yeah, I mean, I obviously would love to see it happen one day and we'll see. But and then yeah, like the Stan Lee script, it's like I grew up as a comic book nerd, you know, so that was always a story that was super interesting to me, and it was just such a joy to write it because I'm passionate about it, you know. So that's my version of write what you know, you know. And then obviously, yeah, 90s kid from Chicago, like the Jordan element is what was pretty easy. But then the other part of it too was just like connecting to Sonny as a character, you know, like where I was as like a struggling writer who just felt like, gosh, everything's stacked against me, and I've like had all these false starts, but nothing's ever really worked out. Like I don't think I was really thinking about it at the time, but now looking back, it's like, you know, kind of clear how I was able to step into those shoes and write that sort of character, because a lot of it is like emotionally what I was going through at that specific moment in my life.
It's a great answer. Well, I think we're about out of time. I did want to say one last thing. If I tilt my head, you can see my law degree. I'm a Trojan too, so fight on.
There you go, man. Fight on. Yeah. Disappointing football season, but you know,
less the said, the better on that. But yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, and good luck this award season. You know, I
Thanks.
know this is already the start of great things. Everyone knows your name, but it'd be even cooler if you become Oscar nominee, Alex Convery. So we're rooting for you on that front, man.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely. All right.